Now I'm going to show you how to create an experience mapping based off of the attributes that we've just discussed. So we're going to start with the funnel, and I'm going to use my neighborhood as an example and kind of describe to you how different parts of my neighborhood apply to the attributes that we discussed. So the first idea was the funnels. And in my neighborhood, I have down the street a set of school buildings that lead into a playground in the back. And there's the two buildings and then a pathway between the two buildings. So when you're kind of funneling in, you can take various paths to get to the building. But then once you get to this space between the two buildings, then you have to take one particular path to get between the buildings. And then once you get to the other side of it, you can go over to the playground, which is on the one side, which has like a slide and a climbing wall thing and a drinking fountain. One thing to note about the drawing that I'm creating is it is a sketch and it's very rough looking. I'm not overly focused on making each element within the drawing look photorealistic or even be an accurate contour drawing. So your drawings can be this way too, where they're more rough sketches because they're more focused on the idea that it's portraying rather than the visuals. Okay, and so when you're creating your drawing, it can be very rough looking. So this is an area that serves as a funnel, and I'm actually going to draw kind of a funnel type shape here to really signify that this is the area of my drawing that's the funnel. The second attribute that I'm going to discuss is the pipes. And the pipe is an area that funnels you from one place to another place and makes it really difficult to cross over the pipe. So the area in my neighborhood that serves as a pipe is 16th Street, which is a really busy road. I'm even going to just label it pipe. I could even label this funnel over here too. And the pipe goes from somewhere over kind of by Lake Makatawa to Meyer up at the top. So it kind of creates this big long pipe that I go down. And if I'm biking or walking to get over this, it's very difficult to get to the other side of it. It's hard to get across. Okay, and so that can serve as a pipe. And then a fold is another attribute that we discussed. And a fold is an area where it's kind of a no man's land is the key to that attribute. And so the area that serves as a fold for me is the train tracks up here. That's really a no man's land type of a space where you're not very welcome to go there. And that is a space where it's almost a dividing point too, where there's one neighborhood on the one side of it, and then it's kind of thought of as a different neighborhood once you get to the other side of it. And so it creates this kind of fold of two spaces overlapping one another in this no man's land type of an area. The other part of the train tracks that is interesting is there's a bike path here, and that's sort of the only place where you're allowed to cross over it. Either that or the pipe actually goes over top of it as well. And so you can use those walkways to get over top of the train tracks. But like, for example, you're not kind of welcome to be over here. The way that the playground is set up, and this is a little bit smaller than it actually looks, my drawing is a little condensed here, but there's actually a fence along here so that you can't get, like once you're funneled through here, you can't get to that train track bed. It's to prevent, like kids from going on the train tracks during recess or whatever. So it's really a no man's land because you're not supposed to go onto that area. In part because it's dangerous, but also because it's kind of noisy and it's not very inviting. There's not a place to sit down or anything like that. So that can be a space where you're not invited to go. Then another attribute is a sponge. And a sponge is an area that kind of draws you into it. So that might be a commercial district. Now, with our current shutdown, we are not drawn into spaces, so the sponges aren't really functioning as such currently, but you can think back to how it functioned before the shutdown. What would be the areas that kind of draw people in? So for me, we had this hair salon that's down the way, and next to where the hair salon is currently, there used to be a coffee shop, which was really a big sponge, because people would go there and hang out for a period of time. So, and then I'm going to actually draw a sponge shape around this. So I've got my SpongeBob SquarePants here. So sponge kind of drawing people in, right? And then the other attribute that we talked about was phantom limbs. Now, I don't have a great example of a phantom limb in my neighborhood, but I'll talk about a few possibilities because maybe you have one in your neighborhood. So a phantom limb is a place that you tend to kind of avoid for a variety of reasons, or that you don't go to. Like if there's a fence in a certain area, so then you can't walk from one place to another. It would become a phantom limb when the fence was removed and then people still avoided that area. Or, for example, there might be a tree in a certain area and people kind of go around the tree because they can't walk through it, obviously. And so that tree, once it gets cut down, people still kind of walk around the area as if the tree was still there, even though it's not. Okay, and so that would be a phantom limb. One of the spaces that kind of functions in this way for me, but the thing is, it's not phantom. Like it's still a limb. It's still an avoided spot. Is the liquor store down the way? It just has a kind of a rougher clientele, and there's been cases of people bringing weapons in, and it's just kind of more of an unsavory place to be. And so that is a space that I tend to avoid, and like even when I'm biking past it, I like maybe feel a little bit more tense when I'm going past it, or when we take a walk with our family, we don't walk that way. We prefer to go the other direction where the park is, which is over here. And I'll talk more about the park and how that functions in a minute. But so that's a space that tends to get avoided because of what kind of a space it is and the kind of the history of the space. And so that's one of the things about the phantom limb that it's referencing, is it's referencing like something that used to be there that no longer is, right? And so you can think through your neighborhood and see if you've got areas like that. And then the last thing is an enclosure. And I said we were going to reference the park in a moment, and that's what I think of the park as functioning as, because the park is a contained space and you're either within the park or outside of the park. And there's not a fence that necessarily surrounds the park, but you know where it starts and ends because of the sidewalks and things like that. So that kind of defines the shape of the park. There's also a nice playground in here that we're not allowed to use right now. And so there's some swings in here. And there's a really cool zip line that you can go on. Grab onto the handle and zoom across. And then there's a lot of really nice trees in this park as well. Okay, and so this is an enclosure, so a space that has a really delineates between the inside of it and the outside of it. Another place that would function as an enclosure is there's a backyard over here and this is my whole block, which my whole block even functions as somewhat of an enclosure in my mind. So, and that's one thing to think about with these drawings. These might not be the case. You're not drawing something that's the case for everybody. It's an experience map, so it's based on how you see the space that you walk through. All right. And so, but on the corner of my block here is an enclosure that has this dog that barks really loud. And my younger son is kind of afraid of dogs. And so we always very much, maybe it even would, in that sense, function as a phantom limb, even when the dog is inside. So anyways, there's this dog that's loud, that's enclosed into a fence. And so the dog is an enclosure. Other fenced-in yards might serve as an enclosure as well. Like if you've got someone who has this really big fence around their yard, it's very clear what is their yard and then what is not their yard, right? And so enclosures really delineate between what's inside of a space and what's outside of a space. Another area that serves as an enclosure, just more for me personally, is my block, right? And so as a family at night, we'll sometimes, if we haven't been outside enough during the day, we'll take a walk around the block. And so we'll actually just walk around our whole block without crossing over any roads. And so that is an enclosure in my mind, is what is our block, right? I think of my block as being a particular enclosure. And so those are the different attributes of my neighborhood that fall into these categories that we've discussed. And I have them kind of labeled and drawn out. So what you're going to be asked to do now is take a piece of paper and a pencil, or you can do this on a tablet even, and draw a sketch of your neighborhood or of your house or of your yard. Actually, like, it's kind of interesting. I did this for my whole neighborhood, but I did allow for you all to do a walk inside if you were more comfortable staying inside. And so this could be really interesting in terms of your house and the interior space of your house. Like, you could think of, do you have a pipe in your house? Like, is there a pipe maybe from your bedroom to the kitchen and you kind of don't really notice the other spaces along the way and you just kind of get on that pipe and go to the kitchen, right? Or is there a sponge? Like, maybe the kitchen is a sponge that draws people into it. Maybe the living room, or maybe the television set, depending on what kind of a family life you have, like, is that where people are drawn to, right? Are there different enclosures within your house? Like, is there a specific place where your pets are allowed to be, but then they're not allowed to be in other places, or something like that? You could definitely apply some of these strategies to an interior of a house. Like, I even think of my yard and how my yard can kind of fall into these categories. So I was even noticing the other day that there's kind of a pipe that goes from our back door to our chicken coop. And it's so much so that there's like a path that's being developed in the grass there because we walk that so much to go get the eggs or go water and feed the chickens. And so we've got that pipe that's happening there that's creating this path in our yard. So you could even apply this to your yard as well. So which